Our reading is from Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through the beginning of verse 19, a continuation of the story that we were involved in last week. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it, and he called that place Bethel. Would you pray with me? Lord, take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds and think through them. And take our hearts and set them on fire with a love for you. Amen. Well, we're continuing in our series entitled Awkward Family Stories. At this point, I don't think I'm going to take the time to review everything that we've discussed so far. But suffice it to say that we're looking at these stories with a level of depth and honesty that might not be appropriate for a child's Sunday school class. We need to be clear, however, that I make no apologies for the awkward nature of these stories. If anything, we need to be reminded and encouraged to know that God works through awkward family stories just like ours. You know, on the surface, you might initially think this falls into the less awkward category. I mean, we're referencing a song that's well known to all of us. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. But we really cannot appreciate this text without recalling the direct connection to the truly awkward story that we spoke about last week. Jacob, the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, was fleeing from his twin brother Esau, who had just vowed to kill him. Esau was furious with Jacob because Jacob had stolen Esau's birthright, the Jewish claim to inheritance and blessing. The mother, who had loved him dearly, urged him to flee. And while you may not put this together, he was never to see his mother again. She was never to see her son again. Jacob's grasping for status within the family resulted in danger and separation. So then Jacob really is portrayed here as a fugitive, fleeing his life, kind of a vagabond somewhere in between a conflict-ridden past and a very uncertain future. So then it is exactly at this point of limbo, being landless and rootless and with no real prospects for the future, that God meets Jacob at a place of no particular significance. Jacob's stopping at this point was not part of any particular plan he had. He didn't have a goal to travel so far that day. He didn't have a plan to go camping under his favorite tree. His reason for stopping there was no more strategic than the fact that the sun went down. We read there, quote, "He stayed there for the night because the sun had set." Simply making do with what he had. We read that, quote, "Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place and went to sleep." It tells you something about how exhausted he was when a stone was a suitable substitute for a pillow. So amid this fervent activity of a man on the run, Jacob has a dream. In verse 12, we read that he dreams of a ladder that reaches to heaven with angels of God going up and down upon it. Now, with all due respect to the song, one should probably not think of a ladder in the contemporary sense that we imagine a ladder to be, but rather it was probably something more like a Mesopotamian ziggurat, a kind of a ramp-like structure that served as a means by which heaven and earth were created. The stairway to heaven does not give Jacob access to heaven. Rather, God speaks to Jacob where he is, sort of denoting God's imminent presence, rather than a faraway God calling him from a distance. But it is significant that this surprise encounter completely comes from God, breaking into Jacob's state of sleep. It might also be helpful to reflect here for a little bit about what was not said by God. God did not start off saying, "Well, I have a little something to share with you, but before we get into that, let me take advantage of this opportunity to remind you of how you really blew it with your family. You couldn't trust me to work things out for you? You really had to stoop to deceiving your own father? Now look at the mess you're in." So God did not start this way. He didn't start by laying a guilt trip on him. It would seem that so often we do a good enough job ourselves, feeling guilty all by ourselves, that it may not always be necessary for God to add to the mix. Now, I would like to suggest here that he gave something even more valuable. God conveyed to Jacob a sense of his presence and a sense of heavily engagement with the affairs of the earth. So with all due respect for the song, it really wasn't Jacob's ladder. It was God's ladder. And at no point was Jacob himself ever climbing the ladder. He was just observing God's engagement with his creation, God's own messengers ascending and descending, symbolizing their role in working out God's plans and purposes. And then something even more significant. He had heard about God's direct involvement in the lives of Abraham and Isaac. But what about him? Was he left on his own devices to execute the plan of the covenant? You might conclude that that's what he could have thought. But now the time of hearsay is over, for now we have God speaking directly to Jacob and saying, quote, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. And now, by golly, get this, I am your God as well. I know you're feeling at your most vulnerable right now, but know that I am with you wherever you go. You know, when you have that kind of assurance and you kind of get it in your gut, you know, any of the details, they're not that important. You know the presence of God. Dreams, what do you make of them? There are several dreams that are related throughout Scripture that are viewed with the utmost of importance. Mention elsewhere is made of people who have the gift of interpretation of dreams. Just as a footnote here, you should know that dreams are something that I've come to take seriously in my own life. I was first exposed to the teachings of Carl Jung, the founder of depth psychology, when I was in college, but have been reading quite a bit of this school of thought, particularly over the last 10 years. I was previously a member of the Young Society of Washington, D.C., and personally I sought out working with a Jungian analyst for a couple of years that was very important to me. It seems that most people don't take their dream life too seriously these days and view their dreams mostly as a byproduct of too much greasy food. But it's also clear to me that so many people put so much energy into staying on the surface of life that they effectively suppress the still small voice of God within. I believe that God longs to speak with us, but it often isn't until our defenses are lowered that his voice can break through to us. And so often it is in symbolic language, as we have here today with the image of a ladder extending to the heavens. And usually dreams are not about giving specific instructions, like move to Montana and raise llamas, but more about having your own powerful experience of the presence of God, like Jacob did. So when you experience God's presence in this way, it changes you. It stays with you as it has stayed with me. And so it was with Jacob. When Jacob awoke from his dream, his circumstances had not changed, but he was a changed man. His circumstances had not changed, but he was a changed man. I cannot overstate the importance of his words when he says, quote, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And isn't that the truth? God was in the place all along, yet Jacob was so caught up in the outward drama of his life that he just was not able to perceive it. Can any of you relate to that? Are you so overwhelmed by the myriad of details in the drama of your life that you just can't sense God's presence? Maybe sometimes just when Our defenses are sufficiently lowered when we hit rock bottom, that we get a gift of vision, a vision that seems more real than the reality of what's going on around us, and our soul is transformed simply by an awareness of God's presence. Yeah, and really, there's nothing about this passage that's intended to be funny, but there's something here that struck me as funny. Jacob is way out there, absolutely in the middle of nowhere, and in the midst of his suffering, he has this transforming experience of God, and what does he do? He sets up a little monument, which over time grew into a famous sanctuary, which over time evolved into an important city. You see what's happening? We make a powerful discovery that God is in this place, and then we start to think, well, there's something significant about this place itself, and we limit God to a place, when the truly powerful revelation should be that God is amazingly in every place, at every time. It's kind of a funny thing about human nature. We have an experience of God, and we put up a monument, and we build a wall around it, and sell tickets for people to come and visit the spot. We love to build buildings, and we try to capture the essence of God in a building so we can visit God at our convenience. Yet in the very midst of our good intentions, we may actually be doing a disservice to our fellow seekers when we invite them to visit the God of a place. We might inadvertently make it harder for people to discover the God of every place, the God of every moment. The awesome, powerful, loving presence of the living God is trying to break into our awareness right now. But we construct so many barriers in our conscious world that most of us find a hard time to see that. Maybe when you sleep and your conscious mind is shut off, God might surprise you by speaking to your unconscious mind. Maybe when you hit rock bottom and your illusions are shattered, you'll discover that the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Maybe when you were away from home on a missions trip, and you think you're going to share the good news with someone else, that you start hearing the good news to yourself, as you've never heard it before. What's your Bethel dream? Have you had a low point in your life when you felt like all you had was a stone for a pillow? Yet in that low point, you discovered, like me, an uncanny sense of God's presence. That beyond simply affirming with your lips that you serve the God of Abraham and Isaac, that you might grasp that in your heart, as Jacob finally did, that you are a child of the covenant. You. The Lord has had a claim on your life all along, and you just didn't know it. When you have been gripped so, don't try to build a wall around that spot, for you could never build a circle big enough to contain that presence. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Amen.